My friend mysteriously disappeared after my engagement. 10 years later, she sent me a letter that revealed my husband's secret. It seems that life always gives you more than you expect. No matter how difficult it is, everything seems to fall into place. You try not to ask unnecessary questions because you believe that there are no answers to them. I lived like that, and it seemed to me that my world was based on simple rules. But reality often destroys our naive beliefs. I had it all: a great career, a strong family, a husband I loved, and a best friend with whom I experienced all the important moments of my life. Lauren was my support, my mirror that I looked into to make sure everything was right. She was always there for me, whether it was celebrations or moments of disappointment. We dreamed together about our future weddings, families, and homes. She was a part of me. When I met Michael, he seemed perfect. He was charismatic, kind, always paid attention to me, admired my ideas, and supported my plans. My mom loved him. My friends kept saying that we were made for each other. Lauren was also fond of him, although she seemed to be a bit reserved in her assessments. She never expressed any overt dislike, but I noticed that sometimes she wasn't as open as usual. It was a small, almost imperceptible feeling, but I tried to ignore it. And so we started preparing for the wedding. It was one of those moments when the world seems perfect. Lauren and I were choosing dresses, discussing all the details, and I was happy because I knew she would be by my side at this important stage. All my thoughts were about how to make this day unique. And, at that moment, I didn't realize that everything I knew was just a big lie. A few days before the wedding, Lauren became strange. She was as supportive as ever, but I noticed that she was avoiding talking about my future. She became withdrawn, her eyes often absent. When I asked her about her relationship, she started avoiding the topic, smiling vaguely and changing the subject. This was uncharacteristic of her. Her words became less and less open, and I began to feel some tension in our friendship, but I immediately dismissed these thoughts. Maybe it was just stress from the wedding preparations. Maybe she had problems that she didn't want to talk about. I didn't want to believe that there could be room for deception or alienation in our close friendship. The day Lauren disappeared, I still can't get it out of my mind. It happened so suddenly, as if she was simply gone. She just didn't show up for the wedding rehearsal. All the thoughts in my head were about one thing: what happened? I tried to call her, but she didn't answer. I wrote messages, trying to find out what happened, but I received nothing in return. At the time, I was convinced that maybe it was just an accident. Lauren probably decided she needed some time to herself. Maybe she was worried about her life or her relationship. Maybe she has personal problems that she doesn't want to bring into the public eye. And I was convincing myself of this so much that I didn't even notice how much I was disappointed by her absence. The wedding took place without Lauren. I remember looking at the seat next to me where she was supposed to be sitting, and the feeling that she was not there overwhelmed me every time I looked at her. So, when Michael asked me if I wanted Lauren and I to continue our friendship, I said, yes, of course, everything will be fine. I didn't understand why this question even came up, because I was sure she just needed space. And then I even thought, maybe Lauren is just not ready for change. Maybe she's just jealous of Michael and I having a future family, and it was a heavy blow to her. Almost a month after the wedding, I received my first call from Lauren. It was strange because it was so rare after she suddenly disappeared. But she just said that she was okay and that everything was fine, that she needed some time to herself. I didn't ask why she wasn't at the wedding, or why she didn't answer my numerous calls. I decided that was the end of it. Lauren would come back when she was ready. But she didn't. And strangely, after a few weeks, I didn't even get a single word from her, not a single explanation. Lauren disappeared from my life as if she had never been there. I thought it would get easier with time. But I never let go of that feeling, the feeling that I didn't know the whole truth. Why did she leave me when I needed her so much? Why didn't she tell me what was going on? Why did her disappearance feel like turning a page in my life that I didn't want to turn? I started to think about Lauren less often, but as it turned out, she became part of some new, dark story that had to come back to me sooner or later. It's been over 6 years since Lauren disappeared from my life. I thought I would never see her again. My family became my main priority at that time. I tried to build my life together with Michael, building careers, planning our future. It seemed to me that I could overcome any obstacle, and there was no limit to my happiness. But no one realizes how deeply secrets can leave their mark on the heart. My confidence that I was on the right track began to crack at the seams when I received a letter. A letter that made my hands shake. When I saw the name on the envelope, at first I thought it was a mistake. Lauren? How could she be? But her name was not a mistake. It was a real letter from my friend, after all these years of silence. I couldn't believe it. The letter was written on an ordinary piece of paper, with a small handwritten address. It felt like it was not just left in the mail, but carefully chosen to get my attention. As I read the first few lines, I felt my heart sink into my chest. Lauren was apologizing for her disappearance and describing how she couldn't understand what had made her leave. But her apology sounded ruthless. She wrote that she left everything because she could no longer be a part of my life. She recalled seeing Michael and me and feeling trapped by her own feelings, that it was becoming increasingly difficult for her to keep the face of her best friend on when deep down she knew something was wrong. Only, what she described next was what broke me completely. She told me that she and Mike shared a secret, and that it concerned me the most. She mentioned an incident that I had never heard of, even though it seemed like I knew every move my husband made. Lauren told me how one day, while we were celebrating my birthday together, Michael was very nervous. She couldn't understand why he was acting like that, but there was something in his eyes that made her feel like he was confused. That evening was just wonderful for me. It was everything I wanted my life to be, full of love, joy, laughter, and carefree. But Lauren saw something I hadn't noticed. So she asked Mike what was wrong with him. And their story began. She decided to move away from me because she was afraid that if she stayed close to me, she wouldn't be able to keep quiet. She realized that it could ruin my life, and so she chose silence instead of telling me the truth. However, the worst was yet to come. At the end of the letter, Lauren wrote, "I want you to know that I have always loved you like a sister. But what happened made me step back. I'm sorry. I can't tell you anymore, but I know you need to know. You and I will always be connected, but you have to know the truth about him. I hope that you will understand why I did this when you know everything. Maybe it's too late." My heart sank as I reread those last lines. What did she mean by that? I couldn't imagine what could be so terrible that Lauren would decide to leave me and keep quiet all this time. Could she have meant what I was so afraid to hear? Was Michael really who he seemed to be? And if so, how could I not see it? I was paralyzed with shock, but one thing was clear: this mystery left me no choice. I had to find out the truth, even if it meant saying goodbye to my greatest illusions. I sat with the letter in my hands for more than half an hour, closing my eyes and trying to remember every moment when I could have noticed something suspicious. Lauren was right. I couldn't stop myself from wondering why I hadn't noticed anything. How could I have been so blind? After all, I thought I knew my husband like the back of my hand. He was my support, my friend, my partner. But now everything I knew was being called into question. Every moment of our life together began to seem less than pure. I remembered how he behaved during our last vacation together, when he was too thoughtful and distant. How he had left the house several times late at night under some pretext, but hadn't given me a clear answer. How his phones, which I had ever looked into, always had passwords that changed without warning. How he avoided open conversations about his past. I respected his desire not to talk about everything that had happened before we met, but now it all looked suspicious. I knew I had to find answers. They were necessary to free me from this painful feeling of distrust that was now haunting me. Gathering all my strength into a fist, I decided to talk to him. But not just ask him, but ask him in a way that would force him to tell the truth. My intuition told me that I couldn't leave it for later. That evening, when Michael came home, I was ready. We were sitting at the table, dinner was on the table, but we were both silent. He felt tense, I knew it, but I didn't try to relieve it. I had to do it, I had to speak up. "Michael, I got a letter from Lauren," I said, watching his reaction. He stopped, and his eyes instantly darkened. I noticed his expression change for a moment, trying to remain calm, but I knew he was worried. "Lauren? It's been a long time, why do you remember her?" His words were cold, but I noticed something in his voice that I hadn't heard before. "Because I had to know, Michael. Because she told me things that make me doubt everything. Don't you understand? She left me because she couldn't be a part of my life anymore after she found out what happened between you two." "What was it, Michael? What is she talking about?" He looked to the side, as if searching for words, but I could tell he didn't know what to say. My hand was clenched into a fist, and I couldn't stand the silence any longer. "Lauren said I had to know the truth," I said with a strength I didn't even realize I had. I couldn't take the uncertainty and the lies anymore. He realized that there was no way to avoid this conversation, so he began to speak slowly, almost naturally. "I didn't want it to affect you, I didn't know how to say it." "What exactly?" I didn't let him change the subject. "It's not what you think, but there were a few things I didn't want you to know about. I've been working on some things that involved Lauren. And it wasn't just a letter, Vic. She was more than just a friend. I had a connection with her." His voice was firm and determined, but I could see the guilt and fear in his eyes. "I had an affair with Lauren. It happened before we were married, and I decided to end it because I realized you were the only thing I needed. But Lauren, she couldn't accept the fact that I left her. She started threatening to tell you everything. I could feel my heart clenching and it was hard to breathe. I couldn't believe it. Everything I had ever thought about Michael had crumbled in an instant. I didn't know whether to feel more anger or disappointment, or if it was just the bitter truth I needed to hear. My world, my life, was in danger of collapse. I realized that I made a mistake, and although I never wanted to lose you, I did. I think that you must now decide for yourself what to do with this knowledge. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was a betrayal that lasted over a year, and I was the last one to know about it. It became hard for me to breathe, and it seemed like the whole world was crumbling around me. All my dreams, all my plans, it was all a lie. And Lauren, my close friend who was a part of my soul, was a victim of this betrayal, but why did she keep silent for so long? What else don't I know? How could I have believed him? I sat at the table, completely overwhelmed. My brain was trying to organize the information I had just learned, but it was extremely difficult. I looked at Michael, and even his face, which had seemed familiar, now seemed foreign. How could I not notice this? How could I not see all these signs when they were right in front of me? The silence between us was as heavy as concrete. We sat there for a few minutes, but it seemed like an eternity. I tried to understand what I was feeling. Perhaps I should have felt anger, but most of all I felt betrayal. The worst part was that I started to doubt everything, even my ability to trust people. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" I said without looking up. My hand holding the cup began to tremble. "Why did I find out only now? Did you ever think about me when you did that?" Michael fell silent again, and I saw his shoulders slump. He was in pain, I could tell, but it didn't make me feel any better. It didn't change how I felt. I was angry, very angry, but not only at him. I was angry at myself for trusting him, for not seeing the obvious signs. But I couldn't afford to leave it all on his conscience. This situation was more than just his mistake, it was our joint disaster. "I can't believe that you just abandoned us to put all this in your past, and now I have to live through this." My loud, almost shouted remark pierced the air between us, and I immediately felt something heavy swirl in my chest. I couldn't stand this lie for another minute. "Vika, I realize that I hurt you. I'm not trying to justify my actions. I had no right to do that. I love you, and I made a mistake. I have always been with you, but I was afraid that you would leave me if you knew the truth. I'm afraid that now it will be the end of our story." He tried to be honest again, but I didn't know if I could believe him anymore. He asked for forgiveness, but how can you forgive such a betrayal? How can you forgive a person who treated you and another woman the same way? And what if that woman was your friend? Of course, he repented. Of course, he promised to fix everything. But what if he didn't? What if it was all just words, empty words that he used to mask his guilt? What if I was still one of his options, and Lauren was the one he really wanted? Chaos was building inside me. I sat in front of him and felt like every cell in my body wanted to run away. It wanted to leave, but leave this whole situation behind. But one more question kept nagging at me: why hadn't Lauren told me about this before? If she was really such a good friend, why was she leaving me alone with this lie? Why was she willing to watch me live a lie? This question tormented me, and every time I tried to find an answer, it made me feel even worse. If I could turn back time, I would never have allowed myself to be so naive. I would have seen everything earlier, I would have realized that something was wrong. "I don't know if I can forgive you for this, Michael," I said, my words sounding like a sentence. "I can't just ignore everything that happened. It's not just a betrayal on your part. It's a betrayal on Lauren's part. And I don't know if I can go back to that life." He looked at me, and I could see his eyes were full of pity, but nothing could change how I felt. It was a huge betrayal that will hurt me for a long time. "I understand," he said quietly. "I don't expect things to be the same. I just want you to know the truth, no matter what the cost." I was neither hurt nor calm. I felt only emptiness. I did not know what to do next. The feeling that I had been deceived would not leave me, and I knew that my world would never be the same again. That night we didn't talk anymore. I went to sleep in a separate bed, and he stayed in his, as we had long been accustomed to. We were both strangers to each other, and I didn't know if I would ever be able to look at him the same way again. Something changed in me, and it was more than just a feeling of pain. It was a change in my entire perception, and I didn't know where it was leading me. Time passed, but no part of me could heal the wounds. Every day seemed hard, every look at Michael broke my heart. His presence became less and less important, and I noticed how we were growing apart. We couldn't take it back, and I knew I couldn't just forgive everything that had happened. The suspicion, betrayal, and pain seemed so overwhelming. Michael often tried to talk to me, but every time he talked about repentance or a chance for us, I just felt my patience breaking down. How could I trust a person who had clearly violated the most sacred duty of being honest? And to make matters worse, he wasn't the only one guilty. Lauren. I thought of her every time I saw Michael. She was my best friend, the one who shared the most intimate moments of our lives. But what did she do? She left me in the dark, betraying me with a man I trusted. And while I couldn't blame Michael as much anymore, he was only part of this painful truth. Lauren. She disappeared and never explained her actions. She never tried to be honest, never said a word to me about her unfaithfulness. That night I sat in my room, thinking about everything that had happened. There were 1,000 thoughts in my head, but one of them was painfully growing. I couldn't continue to live in such an atmosphere. I could not wait for everything to get better. My soul ached from these unbearable feelings, and I knew I had to change something to get myself back. So when Michael knocked on my door as usual and came in, I was ready for the conversation I had been trying to avoid. But now it was clear, we can't just turn it back anymore. We can't just forget. I felt like I was at a crossroads, and I realized that if I stayed with him, I would never be at peace. It would be a constant struggle with myself, with my feelings, with my memory. And the worst part is that it's not just a relationship, it's my whole life. I had to make a decision. Michael, I said, my voice clearly enunciating each word. I don't know what happened to us, but I can't ignore it anymore. I can't and won't forgive you. Maybe it's selfish, but I can't be with someone who broke my trust like you did. He looked at me sadly, his eyes reflecting a painful realization. The fact that his efforts to save our relationship could not bring back what had been lost made him look helpless. But I wasn't interested in that. I couldn't be something that wasn't there anymore. He betrayed me, and Lauren. She betrayed me even more. You have the right to do this, he said, but I noticed his voice trembling. I understand I can't make you forgive me. I made a terrible mistake, but that doesn't mean I don't love you. Vika, this is hard. Maybe it's hard for you, I replied, still holding his gaze. But I have another question that's been tormenting me. Lauren. Why didn't she ever tell me the truth? Why did she disappear when I needed her most? His face turned pale. I could see him hesitate, and I realized there was something else he wasn't telling me. He looked away and began to explain quietly. I can't explain what she did. She asked me not to talk about it, but I know it was her choice. I can't take responsibility for what she did. I looked at him with despair. You mean you don't know why she did it? You don't understand her motives? I asked this, but I was no longer hoping for the answer I wanted to hear. I felt like he was holding on to some darker part of the truth, and now that it was finally out in the open, I was ready to look for it myself. I don't know, he almost whispered, sounding truly devastated. But I can tell you one thing, even if she's gone, it doesn't change what I did. His words did not bring me relief. They only raised more questions, more doubts. I realized that from that moment on, everything changed. Nothing would be the same as before. And although I wanted to find answers to all my questions, I already knew that some of them would remain unanswered. If I hadn't known this truth, perhaps I could have continued to live in my naivety. But now none of that mattered anymore. I had to accept reality as it was and give myself time to figure out what to do with it all. A few weeks passed. I found myself in a state where every day was a struggle with myself. The memory of Lauren and Michael, their treacherous union, haunted me every minute. I thought about how we used to laugh together, how we used to share dreams, and how everything had fallen apart. But with each new day, my heart grew colder. I realized that it was impossible to stay in the past, impossible to carry this pain with me all the time. But could I forgive? I freed myself from thoughts of Michael and Lauren, trying to understand who I was now. It was a terrible journey through my own soul. All those feelings that were rolling in like waves were mixed with anger, disappointment, and fear of the future. I was no longer the carefree girl who dreamed of a wonderful life before my engagement. I was a different person now, and I couldn't turn back the clock. One day, as usual, I was sitting on the balcony, deep in thought, when I received a message on my phone. At first I thought it was another reminder from Michael, who was trying to apologize once again, but when I saw the name, I froze. It was from Lauren. Vika, I'm sorry. I know you hate me, but I had to tell you everything. I needed you to know the truth. That message haunted me. I immediately read it and realized that what Lauren was writing was radically changing my vision of everything that had happened. You and I were both in love with Michael. I thought I could handle it, but then when I found out that you had accepted his proposal, I couldn't leave it alone. He became my addiction. I couldn't help myself. It was a terrible thing to do, and I'm ready to live with it for the rest of my life. I know now that I should have told you the truth. But I ran away because I was weak. I felt something heavy burst inside me. I really did not expect this from her. It was a frankness I never thought I would see. It seemed as if she had dealt with her feelings herself, albeit late. I was hurt, but I knew that I could no longer restore what had been destroyed. I couldn't just pretend that nothing had happened. When I replied to her message, I was not looking for revenge. I didn't want to make her even angrier. I just wanted to explain that although I understood what she said, I could no longer be a part of this lie. I told her that it was the end of our friendship, even though I could understand her painful choice. Time and truth could no longer fix the betrayal she had inflicted on me. At the same time, Michael continued to try to win me back, but everything he did only made me disgusted. How could he be so heartless? How could you hurt the person you planned to spend the rest of your life with? I felt that the time had come. I couldn't stay in this chaos any longer. Although Michael apologized, I was ready to leave him behind. I realized that in order to truly heal, I had to let go of both Michael and Lauren. I could no longer let these people hold me captive to the past. Saying goodbye to them both was the last step in my recovery. I decided not to look for betrayal in my life anymore. I no longer wanted to seek the truth through deception and manipulation. I could no longer let the past control my future. It was not an easy choice, but I knew there was no other way for me. I was ready to start a new life where I would come first. I didn't know what was ahead of me, but I knew one thing: I would no longer be a victim of other people's games. When I looked at my life now, I had mixed emotions. The choice was hard, but I believe it was the right one. Leaving the past behind, I was finally discovering a future in which there would be no place for traitors, manipulation, or pain. My journey to inner peace was just beginning, but I was ready for it. Although I had left my former friends and love, I felt that I had finally found myself. Now I was ready to move forward.